Hello everybody and welcome to lesson 3 in our class planning series. This video is all about creating classes that flow. We'll be talking through how to use transitions and group exercises together. If you've gone through a classical Pilates teacher training, you know that transitions are a part of how we teach the exercise. If you haven't gone through a classical Pilates teacher training, no worries and no teacher training shaming going on here, but this may be one of your first experiences hearing about transitions. Transitions are really the difference between classes that flow and classes that fall kind of flat. It's the difference between clients feeling like that class went by so fast and feeling like that class really dragged on. Transitions are what get you from point A to point B. They are a part of that thread that weaves the entire class together that we have talked about throughout our video on theming and our video on how to structure classes. Now, if you don't know the classical transitions or learning the classical transitions was not a part of your teacher training, no big deal. You can always learn them and incorporate them into your training. Classically, the transitions are used to keep the work flowing, to keep the student moving, but also to keep the powerhouse engaged throughout the entire session. So there really isn't a lot of dead air in a classical Pilates class. Transitions aren't always a specific exercise. We see a lot in classical Pilates on the reformer, on the mat, on a lot of other apparatus that you can transition by using a roll-up. You can do a teaser transition. You see that very often throughout the classical Pilates system, but transitions don't always have to be a specific exercise. Transitions can just be clear cueing to get you from point A to point B. Transitions are an intentional way of moving through a class instead of saying things like, and that's your last rep. Now come up out of that. And now we're going to move into a side lying leg circle and you're going to set up like this. If you're using a clear transition, you say, this is your last exercise. Now for a 3-point turn, right arm back, right leg out, roll to the side onto your belly, right into swan 1, something like that. It gives your students really clear direction on where they need to go. It cuts down that dead air and it keeps your classes moving. When you're thinking of how to transition your students from exercise series to exercise series, take this example of how to get from laying down in supine on your back to then getting up into a seated position. What's going to be the most efficient and effective way to get somebody from laying down to seated? Probably a roll-up, right? So you can just say coming out of the 100 to come up to seated, say the name of the exercise, the roll-up, lift the arms, slide the legs out, roll yourself all the way up, and we're right into saw or spine stretch forward. Using a roll-up to transition from a supine exercise into a seated exercise is going to be one of the fastest ways for you to get from point A to point B. And listen to the clarity of this transition versus not using a transition. We're in the last rep of the 100, inhale 2, 3, 4, 5, exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, roll up to seated, spine stretch forward. Versus not using a transition, we're in our last rep of the 100, inhale 2, 3, 4, 5, exhale 2, 3, 4, 5, pull the knees into the chest, take a little rock side to side, take a breath. And then from here, we're going to come up into a seated position. Of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but especially for new teachers, things like that second example do really come up because we get kind of flustered thinking about what exercise is coming next and how to set people up for the exercise and how to move through it quickly and with flow. So if you can use less words or use the name of a specific exercise to transition the students, do it. When you're putting together your class plans, it's also important to think of those transitions. So think about how you're going to get your students from a supine ab series into a seated position, how you're going from supine into side lying, how you're going from supine then into a prone position. How are you getting all of those places and how can you get there using either as few words as possible or maybe integrating another exercise into that transition. You see this if you've done classes with me on the mat. Think of our mermaid stretch transition. We've been working a lot on a teaser transition to get us from one side to the next. That's the difference between saying arms behind you, teaser the legs, bring it to the other side, we're right into mermaid, versus saying, this is our last rep of mermaid. Then when you're ready, come up out of that, bring your hands behind you and just bring the legs over to the other side so that we can now set up and we'll go right into the second side. Using a transition in that way does require that your students have a level of understanding of the Pilates exercises, right? So using a teaser transition does require that your students know what a teaser is. So it's going to require more educational touch points from you as the teacher, But that's what we are. We're Pilates teachers, and your students are here to learn Pilates. They're here to learn how to move more effectively. Like, it's only going to help them to know more about Pilates and to just like have that underlying education. It's only going to help them move better. Once that all starts to click for them, your classes are going to be moving like quick. And say an exercise, they get right in, they know what the like appropriate or correct transition is to get from point A to point B. And even if you're not teaching in a classical system, if you say 3-point turn to get to prone, your students are going to know where to go if you are practicing that specific transition with them enough. I promise they will. I can say that from personal experience. If you're still feeling a little bit fuzzy on transitions, or you want some more examples of transitions like that 3-point turn or using the roll up to come up into seated, we're going to be talking through a lot more examples, specific examples of transitions that you can use to get from series to series in the extended cut of this video. As always, I will link that information down in the description. Now, when we're talking about effectively using transitions to get people through a class and get classes to flow, it's also important to link that conversation to minimizing equipment changes. So what do I mean when I say that? It means that you're not setting up one exercise, doing it, and then changing the springs or changing the position of the foot bar. If you're going to take the time to kind of slow down the class for a second and make those equipment changes, make the equipment change worth it. Squeeze all you can out of that equipment change so that your students aren't constantly getting up and getting down. Doing this is going to require that you know groups of exercises that can be performed on the same spring tension, with the same foot bar setting, with the short box in the same place. If you're on the chair, with the spring settings in the same place, so that you can really maximize that equipment setup and minimize the amount of dead air and minimize the number of times that you're having to stop the flow to set up the next equipment change. So for example, if we're on the reformer and you're in a supine position with your hands in the straps, what are all of the exercises that you could do in that position without having to change the springs, without having to change maybe where the straps are in the hands, without having to change the position of the foot bar? Right away, I know I can do reach and pull, I can do circles, I can do triceps, I can do a T press, I know that I can do the 100 on a lighter spring setting, I know I can curl up and I can add on leg movements like the series of 5. I can do all of those things on the same spring setting without my students having to come up or come down. From there, I know I can go right into feet and straps without having to change anything on the equipment, just the placement of the straps. And you can make that transition again very quickly by getting out of the last rep. Let's use triceps for an example. We say last rep, bend the elbows, pull in, both loops into one hand, feet and straps. Take the long loops over the arches of the feet. Again, it's going to require that you start saying the names of the exercises. I know that's not something that comes very naturally to a lot of teachers, and some teacher trainings emphasize using the names of the exercises, some don't. It is super helpful to help your students learn, but also to keep the flow of the class if you start using those names. Because what will happen is as your students progress and as they continue coming to you for class, you'll say frog and they'll say, bam, I know where to go. Feet in the straps, heels together, toes apart. The extended cut of this lesson is going to include examples of exercises that you can group together that are on the same spring setting, same equipment setting for the reformer, for the tower, for the chair. I'll include as many as I can. So if you want just kind of like a grab bag example of those things, that's going to be in the extended cut. Again, all that information is down in the description. Another good way that you can really stretch out the time that you were in a certain exercise, we talked about this a little bit in our first video with layering an exercise. In this example, we were talking about teaching a class on the tower with the roll down bar and taking the exercise breathing. If you know that one, you have the roll down bar in your hands. For the example that I used, I was part teaching that exercise so that I could get a little bit more bang for my buck with the setup for that exercise. So I was doing the arms first and then the legs and then bringing it all together. That's another way that you can use one setup and kind of stretch it out for a little bit longer. It's also a good way that you can take more complicated exercises and start to build them up with your students that are ready to level up. Other examples of this would be like on the mat, taking the mermaid stretch and starting to build it up into your full side bend. What are ways that you can do that that's going to keep people in that position for a little bit longer before we make a transition, but maybe isn't just like straight up going into the side plank. Like, how can we continue to build off of that? So for those exercises where maybe you're not sure what you can do in that same spring setting in the same position, part teach the exercise. So you're just there a little bit longer and people can get more familiar with that exercise. Another good example of that would be with something like semicircle. Semicircle can be a really complicated exercise for people to learn the first time, and to get set up into it, it's a lot for the body positioning to get into it. So if you can build your students up to it, maybe by starting the foot bar down a little bit lower, maybe just starting in a bridge and then trying to slide out into the position where your shoulders are down a little bit further on the carriage, that's going to help your students learn more effectively, but it's also going to kind of take up more time in the grand scheme of class planning. We've skirted around this just a little bit as we've been talking about how to group exercises together that have the same setup. Layering exercises. So part teaching is a part of how you can layer exercises. There are also ways that you can create layers in your exercises that will benefit your multi-level classes. So think of the 100 as an example. There are so many different ways that you can do the 100. Fundamentally, like, what is the goal of the 100? It's a breathing exercise. So if you're breathing in for 5, you're breathing out for 5, you're doing the 100. How can we kind of add on another layer to that? Just pumping the arms. Breathing in for 5, breathing out for 5. The next layer is going to be coming up into your head nod neck curl. The next layer, maybe you're pulling the knees into the chest and you're putting that all together. The next layer, legs go up. Next, legs go out and you're at your ideal position. So knowing how you can dial that exercise back, but also push it forward is going to be helpful not only for you, but for your students. Planning a class is not about like you being the superstar as the instructor. Planning a class is like thinking about your students first and how you can effectively teach them and help them learn these exercises. If I have a more beginner level class, but it's still like a little bit mixed level, when I'm teaching the 100, maybe I just start it with the knees into the chest and we're curling up. And I say, if you need to do less, you lower your head down. If you need to do more, you're shooting your legs right out to working level. Using verbiage like that to give your students options and to start to learn what their limits are and what they are capable of on any given day. Because you might run into some of your more advanced students, like they wake up one day and they're like, nope, I can't do working level in the 100. So they need to know those options to dial back as well. And using wording like that, it doesn't have to be throughout every exercise, but definitely the more advanced exercises, giving those options is going to empower your students to make the right decisions for them. So that's another very important piece. Layering kind of pulls everything together. I'm going to give you guys more examples of layering exercises in the extended cut of this, but that little blurb is going to get you pretty far when you're thinking about how to plan those classes. The last piece I'll say about using transitions in your class planning and creating classes that flow is that sometimes you'll plan a class and you think it really hits the mark, and then you'll teach it and either things fall flat or you feel like things just crash and burn, and that's okay. That's okay. Not every class is going to flow perfectly. Not every class is going to like be the way that you envisioned it in your head, and that's totally okay. That is honestly, it's just a part of the job. It's a part of being a good Pilates teacher, and it's just a part of the learning process. And that's really what Pilates is. It's a learning process, both for you as a teacher and for your students. So if you have those classes where you're like, oh no, like nothing worked out, nobody listened, I tried this transition and it didn't work, it's okay. Don't give up. Don't give up on that class plan. Try it again, or maybe take segments of that class and try it again. Sometimes we feel like things crash and burn because we're trying something new with our students and it doesn't click right away. But think of all the times that you tried something new for the first time and like you didn't automatically crush it the first go around. Like, students need the repetition. So don't give up and don't feel down on yourself if you try a new transition or you're trying to get things to move a little bit more with the flow and it doesn't hit that first time. Just keep working at it. That's the most important thing. All of the things that we're talking about in this series, like, they really do take time and they take practice. And if you're willing to put in that time and put in that practice and recognize, when you need to tweak a class plan or when you need to, continue to work on something or, toss something, continue to work on it, right? It's only going to make you a better teacher ultimately. And that's the goal of all of this. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, as always, let me know down in the comment. If you want more information on my entire class planning course, I'm leaving all of that information down in the description. Remember, you're awesome. You can do anything you put your mind to, and I'll see you back here for our next video.